Hi everyone, in today's video I will talk about the commonly asked questions during the PhD defense. So what is the PhD defense? So depending on your university, you have to defend your thesis, your PhD, sometimes and most of the times during the end of your research studies, just before you are going to submit your PhD, or sometimes it is after you have submitted and your examiners want you to talk about it, to explain your thesis. Now it is normally examined, your thesis is normally examined by external examiners, and again, like I said, depending on the university, depending upon your country's requirements and your university's requirements, sometimes the examination is done just before you submit your thesis, sometimes it is done after you have submitted and you have received the reviewers comments back, sometimes it is done after 1 year of your research studies if you are a full-time PhD student, and 2 years if you are a part-time PhD student. So at some stage of your PhD, you have to defend your thesis. When you say defend your thesis, that means that you have to argue for the strength of your PhD, argue for the scientific arguments that you present in your PhD or your thesis. So what are the normally the commonly asked questions? Now it is, if it is towards the end of your PhD, it is just when you have submitted and you have received the examiner's comments, and now they are asking you to defend your thesis. What are commonly asked questions during a PhD defense? So one of the questions that will definitely be asked of you is that what are the contributions of your research? Now remember, when you're talking about this, when you talk about the contributions of your research, make sure you mention the unique aspects of the research, unique contributions to your research. This is especially in comparison to the other research studies which have investigated the similar problems. So your research cannot be simply that, let's say someone has done a study in nursing, your unique contribution cannot be that you are doing it in retail. That is not a unique contribution. You just cannot copy someone's study, put it in the context of your study and say that's a unique contribution. No, it is one of the contributions. It cannot be a unique contribution. A unique contribution is either that you have added something new to the theory, added something new in terms of methodology, found out something that is generalizable to all the population or most of the population or the majority of the population, something that is found useful in other contexts as well. So if you have found something very useful in the retail industry, can it also be applicable in the medical industry, aeronautical industry, maritime industry, railway industry, or other aspects, and social sciences, community services, education. So these are the unique contributions that help you to stand out your research. What are the unique contributions? Simply saying that you took somebody's idea and you then applied it in your context, in your sample, and is not a unique contribution. All right. Another question they will ask you is that how is your methodology? How was it chosen? How have you addressed the criticism? What are the strengths and the weaknesses? So when you talk about the methodology of your research, remember, it is not only the what. You don't explain only the what, you also explain the why. That means that you talk about why you have chosen this methodology, why this methodology or the chosen methodology helps you to answer the research question better than any other methodologies which are there. So simply saying that I'm going to use a survey, or I'm going to use a focus group, or I'm going to use both surveys and focus groups and observation is not enough unless you explain why they are the best ways. Because sometimes in a research, a simple survey of 500 people or 300 people is enough. Sometimes a survey of 100 people has to be supplemented by a focus group discussion of 6 or 7 or 8 people. Sometimes it has to be supplemented with observation. So not necessarily that you have to do a lot of things in every research. It depends on your research question, what helps you to answer your research question. So focusing on the why becomes very important when you're explaining the methodology. So that is how you have to deal with the methodology. All right. When you are defending the unique contribution, remember that you have done a literature review. So you have to explain how is your research different from any of the past research that has been carried out. How does your research stand out after you completed the literature review? What are the unique aspects of your studies? All right. Another question that they often ask is that how do you see your future research shaping up? What is the future research? How do you see your research making a contribution to any kind of future research? How can your research be grown? So remember, a PhD defense is mainly to show that your research was worthy of being awarded a PhD. So a lot of people do research, and if your research is at a master's level or at an honors level, how do you distinguish it from a PhD research? So that is the reason they are doing a PhD defense. You have to show that you are worthy of a PhD. And how do you show that? Is that the problem you have solved, the problem you have investigated, the answers that you find to your questions, your research questions, is worthy of a PhD. So to do that, you have to show, you have to explain how the research problem you investigated, the scale at which you investigated, the findings of which, the unique contributions are significant enough for you to be awarded a PhD. Alright, if they are not significant in the examiner's eyes, if the findings that you have found is only applicable in your context of study, that it cannot be generalized to other context of study, it cannot be generalized to other industries, they cannot make use of this finding, then they might say that this is not worthy of a PhD. Alright, so they will like to ask you, what was the future of your research? How do you see this research becoming significant? What are some of the aspects that you think you will investigate further? It is not to show that you will have to do a postdoctoral. It is not for you to say that yes, I will be investigating, but it is shows the future impact of your research. It shows the significance of the work that you have been doing and how this work can only become bigger with deeper investigation. Alright, another question that they ask you is about ethical considerations. Were there any ethical considerations to be thought of in your research? If you were doing any human experiments, were you doing any kind of observations without informing the participants? Did you collect data from the community which was sensitive data, like data about sexual harassment or data about childhood abuse, or were you recording people without their consent? All these kind of ethical considerations. There could be many kinds of ethical considerations. Now ethical considerations become more harder and more significant if there are human participants involved. It's much lesser if it's just a simple survey or simple interviews, but it is much harder if it is something to do with an intervention treatment. If you are comparing a control and a treatment group, and you are giving some kind of intervention to a treatment group and you are treating them differently, it can have an impact on their health, it can have an impact on their exam scores, it can have an impact on their productivity or the general welfare, their well-being. So these become more ethical. So ethical considerations in research have to be thought of. Often researchers overlook this, or they keep it very simple. It's not that simple. You have to think about all the ethical considerations, especially that you had to consider during the data collection. And how you treated the research participants, what information did you give them out, were they aware of the risk that was posed to them? So all that you have to talk about that as well, you have to defend that as well. Alright, another question they ask you often is about validity and reliability of data. So of course there are many types of validity and there are many types of reliability, but they basically want to see is that the data that you have collected, how is that data the right data to answer your research question? So there is no point in collecting lots of data if it doesn't answer the research question. At the end of the day, the data that you collect should answer the research question. It should provide a solution to the problem you have proposed at the very beginning, and you should find some kind of a solution to that problem. There are a lot of people who rush into the methodology, who rush into the data collection, and once they are sitting with lots of data, they realize that data is of no use for them to answer their research question. So always be able to explain that is the validity of data. Alright, in terms of reliability of data, they want to know whether if this experiment is repeated, will it get the same results or not? How did you make sure that your data is reliable? So firstly, reliable data is to do with generalizability. Can this experiment be repeated? Does this experiment, can you trust the data, the way you went about collecting the data, was it, for example, if a lecturer is collecting data about their own performance and they are giving the questionnaire to the students, and the students are very concerned that the lecturer who wants information or data about their performance is standing right there, then that data becomes a little bit of biased data, a bit of corrupted data, because the lecturer is present there, so the students will not answer it correctly. So the reliability of data refers to a lot of different things, but mainly it refers to the ability of the experiment being repeated and the outcomes being very similar. Or if it is influenced by how did you control for the extraneous variables or the independent variables, any variables that were influencing the outcome of the study, how did you control for that? So you have to explain the validity and reliability of the data. In terms of limitations, of course, you have to highlight the limitations of your research. So often questions are asked regarding limitations of research. Now, when questions are asked regarding limitations, you have to be very mindful that although it is important to highlight the limitations, if you highlight too many limitations, they will see that you did not think your research through. So if there are too many limitations, that means that your research already has gaps in it, already has loopholes in it, so they can easily pick on your research, they can tear it apart. So the limitations that you address have to be completely something which was out of your hands, something that you had no control over, that you could not do something about that. That is why there were limitations. So, for example, you can say one of the limitations is, of course, you used all the Boolean operators, all the search criteria, you found lots of articles, but one of the limitation is that although you found 200 articles, 300 articles, you used 3 to 4 important databases, there could be some databases out there which were not used, and again, because you had to finish your research within a time period. So if you have used the popular 3 to 4 databases like PubMed or Web of Science or Scopus, then the examiners will understand that if there are some other databases that you didn't use, that's fine, unless of course those databases would have provided you with research very particular to your area, your field. So you have to make sure that you have covered the main databases. And after that, if you say that one of the limitations is that maybe there are more databases out there because of which maybe I overlooked some literature, that's fine, that's still acceptable as long as you have used all the relevant databases. All right, again, if you have said the study in a particular university or in a particular organization and you found enough data from there, you can say that yes, one of the limitations is that the finding of my research is based on the data that I've collected from a particular organization or a particular university, or a comparison of two universities in a particular location, again because it was not feasible for me to travel to many places or something like that. Things that are out of your control can be the limitations of your research. All right, in terms of significance of your theory, the chosen theory, what was the significance and why did you choose it for your study? So remember, your research will most likely need a theoretical framework, a theory that supports your research. So if you are trying to investigate a problem, there should be a theory that explains why you will adopt a certain approach. That theoretical framework then leads to the conceptual framework, which explains how you will go about investigating the problem in terms of data collection, in terms of validity and reliability of data. So that theory becomes very important because that gives you a justification of why you are investigating a problem in a certain way. All right, so if you say, for example, if you say that authentic assessment leads to improved student performance, then the theory of constructivism becomes very important. So because theory of constructivism says that if you construct knowledge out of your own hands, if you are doing something out of your own hands, then you will have a better understanding of the learning than if you are just reading about it, or if you are just studying about it, or if you are just a receiver of knowledge. So that is how a theory supports an investigation. So there are lots of theories there. You have to pick and choose the right theory. Sometimes it is one theory, sometimes it is a combination of a couple of 3 theories, but it has to be the right theory. So you have to be able to justify that this theory was the theory that supported my investigation of my research problem. It gave me the justification based on which I carried out a problem. And then you have to also explain how you have contributed to this theory, how your research has found something that has contributed to this theory. What are the modifications you can make to this theory based on your findings? That is your unique contribution. That is why you get the PhD, which is nothing but a doctorate of philosophy. So your philosophy is a contribution through a theoretical contribution. All right. And then what else is that how your work differs from existing research, and what is the practical impact of your research? So that is also another important question. Is your practical impact? You have to explain firstly when you start off your research, and let's say you are defending your thesis after 1 year of investigation as a full-time student, you have to justify why a research problem exists as you claim it to be existing. So that research problem has to be a real world problem, something that is recognized by the real world as well. It has based on, of course, the research which has already been conducted. So you justify that there was a problem that exists that is worthy of an investigation at a PhD level. You justify the existence of that problem. So similarly, you have to justify the significance of your findings at the real level, at the real world level. So how is your finding going to impact the real world? How will it make a change in the practices, in the systems, in the theories, in the policies in the real world? Have you found out something that can then be practically implemented towards a better outcome, towards a better change, towards the benefit of the community, towards the betterment of the students? How does that impact? So these are the ways you highlight your thesis. These are the ways you will show why your research is worthy of a PhD. So these are the commonly asked questions during a PhD defense, and you have to prepare accordingly. Of course, there could be some questions here and there, but at the end of the day, these are the crux of the questions. At every chapter, when you're preparing for a defense, every chapter, start thinking about these questions. Start thinking about how you can highlight why your every chapter of your thesis is worthy of a PhD. How is it contributing in a at a PhD level to the existing knowledge? How will it have a real world impact? What are the changes you plan to make? Can you provide recommendations to regulatory bodies, to industry bodies, to bodies who are important in your organization, people who are in charge of changing the policies, people who are in charge of changing any practices? How can you provide recommendations to them, and what is it based on? So if your research is based on concrete evidence that you have collected through ethical research which is valid and reliable, then of course your research is going to be considered a PhD worthy. So of course, if I have missed anything, please let me know in the comment section. Otherwise, I hope these videos are useful to you. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you soon with my next video. Bye for now.